Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanatari Yamunatira Vanatari Jaya Radha Madhava Sunda Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Sunda Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Yamunatira Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, John Vishnapada Pramsa Vrajakacharya Sotachati Sri Srimad, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki, His Confounder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki, John Vishnapada Pramsa Vrajakacharya Sotachati Sri Srimad, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki, Nitai Gaur Pramanande Hari Bol. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Sudevaya.
Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 16, titled King Chitraketu Meets the Supreme Lord, text number 40. Yeah, something. I think there's another copy of the 6th canto. Ah, okay. Jitamajita tada bhavata yadaha bhagavatam dharmam anavadyam nishkinchanaye munaya atmaramayam upasate pavargaya Jitamajita tada bhavata Yadaha Bhagavatam Dharmam Anavadyam Nishkinchanaye Munaya Atmaramayam Upasyate Pavargaya Jitamajita Tada Bhavata Yadaha Bhagavatam Dharmam Anavadyam Nishkinchanaye Munaya Atmaramayam Upasate Pavargaya Jitam,
Jitana.
conquered. Ajita,
Ajita.
O unconquerable one.
Goswami.
Tada, then.
And
Bhavata, by your lordship. Yada, when.
when
Aha,
Aha
spoke.
spoke
Bhagavatam,
um,
which helps the devotee approach the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which helps the devotee
helps the devotee
approach the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Dharmam,
Dharmam,
the religious process.
this process.
Anavadayam,
Anavadaya,
faultless, free from contamination.
faultless, free from condemnation.
Nishkinchana,
Distinction,
who have no desire to be happy with material opulences, who have no desire to be happy with material opulences. Yea,
yeah,
those who,
also
munaya,
yeah,
great philosophers and exalted sages.
great philosopher and exalted sages.
Atma arama,
Asma and
who are self-satisfied,
who are self-satisfied,
being completely aware of their constitutional position as eternal servants of the Lord. Yam, who, upasate, worship, apavargaya, for achieving liberation from material bondage. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. O unconquerable one, when you spoke about Bhagavat Dharma, which is the uncontaminated religious system, for achieving the shelter of your lotus feet, that was your victory. Persons who have no material desires, like the Kumaras, who are self-satisfied sages, worship you to be liberated from material contamination. In other words, they accept the process of Bhagavata Dharma to achieve shelter at your lotus feet. As stated by Srila Rupa Goswami and Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Anabilashitam shunyam jnana karmadi anavritam anakulyena krishnanu shilanam bhaktir uttama. One should render transcendental loving service to the Supreme Lord Krishna favorably, and without desires for material profit or gain through fruitive activities or philosophical speculation. This is called pure devotional service. The Narada Pancharatra also states, Sarvopadiya vinir muktam tatparatvena nirmalam hirshi kesha sevanam bhaktir uchyate. One should be free from all material designations and cleansed of all material contamination. He should be restored to his pure identity, in which he engages his senses in the service of the proprietor of the senses. This is called devotional service. This is also called Bhagavata Dharma. Without material aspirations, one should simply serve Krishna, as advised in Bhagavad Gita, Narada Pancharatra, and Srimad Bhagavatam. Bhagavata Dharma is the process of religion enunciated by pure devotees, direct representatives of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, like Narada, Shukdev Goswami, and their humble servants in disciplic succession. By understanding Bhagavata Dharma, one immediately becomes free from material contamination. Living entities, who are part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, are loitering in this material world suffering. When they are instructed by the Lord Himself about Bhagavat Dharma and they adopt it, that is victory for the Lord, for He then reclaims these fallen souls. A devotee following the principles of Bhagavat Dharma feel very much obliged to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He can understand the difference between life without Bhagavat Dharma and life with Bhagavat Dharma, and thus he remains ever obliged to the Lord. Taking to Krishna consciousness and bringing fallen souls to Krishna consciousness is victory for Lord Krishna. Savai sam parodhanamo yato bhakti adhokshate etuki apraprihatta yayatma suprasidati. The supreme occupation, dharma, for all humanity is that by which men can attain to loving devotional service unto the transcendent Lord. Such devotional service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted in order to completely satisfy the self. Therefore, Srimad Bhagavatam is the pure transcendental process of religion. Om Agena Teramandasya Ginanjana Shalakaya Chakshumachalayana Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So we are reading here about Bhagavata Dharma, which Prabhupada translates this term used in the text, Bhagavatam Dharma Anavadyam, as uncontaminated religious system. So there are lots of ways that one can translate Dharma. If one looks, pulls up the online Sanskrit dictionary, for example, and just types in Dharma, the list of translations just goes on and on. Here, Prabhupada chose to translate it as religious system. So we should actually understand what exactly this means. Because a lot of times, uh, what the actual meaning of a word and what the word is used as can, or what people's understanding of the word can sometimes be different. So, religious system generally brings to mind some sort of faith. Uh, there's this idea, especially in the West, that uh, if one is religious, one uh, just simply believes in something without any good reason. And that the marker of a religious system is the specific content of what their dogma or doctrine is. And that for many of the religions that are prominent or well known in the West, there's also the idea of sectarianism, as in you have to be part of our group, or you're going to go to hell forever, or something like that. Sometimes this gets very, very sectarian. My aunt, for example, believes that my grandmother is doomed to spend eternity in hell because she was sprinkled with water at her baptism instead of dunked into water at her baptism. So this is what passes for a religious system these days. That simply you just have to have faith. If uh, you ask, for example, my aunt, what reason do you have for believing these things? That uh, that dunking versus sprinkling with water is that important, or that the words of the Bible are true, or this doctrine or that doctrine. Uh, the general answer is just that it has to be taken on faith. You have to believe it. If you happen to have the right faith, then God likes you, and you will be able to enjoy God. Note that the philosophy is to enjoy God, not to have God enjoy you, for eternity in heaven. And if you happen to pick the wrong faith, then you spend eternity in hellfire. Uh, so when people see Krishna consciousness, they think that it is this type of religious system. I was talking with uh, somebody who was here on the farm the other day, who was a reporter for an agricultural magazine. I was coming and looking at the cows and the temple and all of these things. And she asked a bit about like my personal history and things like that. And I mentioned, of course, that I was studying physics uh, at um, the graduate level. And in one of her follow-up questions, she said, "Oh, so like when you made these big decisions, I'm guessing that your faith uh, influenced those a lot." And I actually corrected her that Krishna consciousness is not a faith. It's a science, a philosophy, and a culture. Actually, science is another term that we should understand very clearly. Because when Prabhupada here is talking about uncontaminated religious systems, we shouldn't just understand it as what we generally think of as religion. You know, people who talk about God, have a holy day sometime a week, have certain rituals. Because there, we could understand it more widely as a belief system. And there are so many various belief systems today that have their own views on human nature, on the goal of human life, on even the process of history, all these things that people simply adopt without critically thinking about it, and form that basically a religious or belief system that must simply be taken on faith without any actual backing. And what is called science these days is exactly one of these belief systems. There tends to be in our culture this idea of science as an unassailable sort of epistemology, an unassailable sort of institution that is very good for getting at the truth of the matter, and that it is the kind of job of, one could say, religionists or bhaktas or whatever term you want to use to adapt or to try to meld the shastras, their ideas, with science. You know, even in debates and things, there's always this idea of whose side the science is on, or to follow the science, or things like that. So there's this idea that this institution of scientific investigation is unquestioningly true, and that all other systems have to sort of conform to it, or that they're kind of, and if they don't, then they're fringe and unscientific. But this is actually just a mythology. Science, as it, or what passes for it today, is to a large extent simply another belief system. There's a very simple example that shows this. And it actually shows why Prabhupada, and whenever talking about scientists, hammered the point of life comes from life. Because as soon as you accept that, you must accept that there is a God. So, of course, there's a lot of definitions for what science could be, and philosophers of science like to talk about endlessly about these things. But at the very core, you could say that it is evidence and reason, trying to figure out things about the world. So, you know, if I tell you, right, that I was not born from a mother and father, I just sprung up from a rock one day, would you believe me? No, you wouldn't. Why not?
Rationally, yeah.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense, right? Everything that we see says that a living entity has a father, right? Comes from another living entity. That life comes from life. Every single investigation tells us that people don't come from rocks. People come from other people. And yet, the scientific view, if you say that the origin of life is abiogenesis, some primordial soup was struck by lightning and then an amoeba formed or something like that. That's supposed to be the scientific idea. while the idea that God created everything is supposed to be unscientific. But if we see the scientific principle of life comes from life, say, okay, even without seeing my father, right? You've never met my father, but you know that I have one. And you know that my father has a father. You know, even that my father's father has a father. So if you extend this logic, then the only logical conclusion is that there must be an Adi Purusha, an original father, who's Sarva Karana Karana, the cause of all causes. And that automatically, is the idea of God. So to specifically to avoid this idea of God, they come up with all these ideas about life coming from matter. There's absolutely zero evidence that life comes from matter. There's not even any indication that life comes from matter. For some things like, with the Big Bang or evolution, of course, those theories are wrong also. But, you can see how people might get to that based on the evidence. It's like, okay, cosmic background radiation, galaxies moving apart. You could see how, if you don't have a complete picture, somebody could think of, there's a Big Bang and things like that. With abiogenesis, with the idea that life comes from matter, there is zero evidence. Actually, I was actually looking into this the other day. There is just a lots of hypotheses. Somebody has this hypothesis for how it could have happened. Somebody has this hypothesis for how it could have happened. There's all just mental speculation. And it is completely unscientific. But the it's so basically it's completely reversed. That actually the scientific conclusion is that there is a God. And the unscientific conclusion, the faith-based solution, is that we came from matter. But in kind of the modern imagination and what we have accepted, it is completely the opposite. That it is considered the scientific thing to believe that life came from matter, and the faith-based or unscientific thing to believe that life came from God. And this whole idea, this whole philosophy was made with the purpose of um, not wanting to have faith in God, of giving a plausible or a plausible sounding reason of not having to believe in a supreme being. And this is what was meant by the term contaminated. Prabhupada uses the term uncontaminated religious system for Bhagavata Dharma. So we can see that other religious systems, whether narrowly defined or widely defined, have some form of contamination. And ultimately, the contamination in most of uh, these other religious systems is the desire for sense gratification. That if we recognize that there is a supreme being, that we recognize that there is a creator, then automatically comes the questions of why did he create? What does he want us to do? Um, what is our proper mm, duty towards this supreme creator? And if one wants to live a life of simply gratifying the senses, then one can then one has to mm, get rid of this idea of a supreme controller, of a supreme being. And this is actually the motivation behind uh, all these various forms of atheistic religious systems. Prabhupada was one time asked about sincere atheists. Prabhupada says there's no such thing as a sincere atheist. Because the evidence for a supreme person is actually so obvious that one has to willingly ignore it in order to uh, persist in one's atheism. And so uh, these things keep going on. And actually, the whole edifice of scientific discovery, the whole culture of science today, is made for keeping the status quo of these materialistic theories in place. Those who have done lots of research that go against the scientific consensus uh, have personal experience of this. I'm thinking specifically of Satiputta Prabhu and Karma Prabhu in terms of their research for forbidden archaeology, which, it's a very thick book full of various examples um, that detail the uh, extreme antiquity of the human race. That the human race is much older than the theory of evolution allows us to be. And if one looks at the if one looks at the critiques of forbidden archaeology specifically, there are two main ones. So to be fair, there are some people who criticize some, not all, of the evidence in the book. Although usually their mode of argument is that they criticize a little bit of the evidence and then say that means the whole thing is invalid, that all of the evidence is invalid. But most of the criticism of uh, the research is that it's not peer reviewed and it's ideologically motivated. Or I think the term they usually use is dogmatically motivated. That, oh, these scholars, or these people who wrote this book, are just doing this in order to uh, prop up their own religious ideas. Of course, that objection itself, if one thinks about it, is also dogmatically motivated in the sense that it doesn't matter why I'm doing the research if the research is good, right? There could be any sort of reason why I do some research, but um, you should either accept the evidence or reject the evidence on the strength of the evidence itself, not the reason why I'm presenting it to you. But uh, people who are making these claims are unable to do that because they say, oh, if we accept this and they're just doing it for supporting their dogma, then we would also be supporting their dogma, which includes the idea of God. And we can't have that. So we have to ignore all of this evidence. And then the whole idea of peer review, um, there's a lot of problems with it, which maybe I'll talk about another time in more detail. But the first step in the peer review process after writing is that it goes to an editor of a journal who, kind of skims over it to see if it's even worth sending off to scientists. If I, just thinking for a little thought experiment, if I sent to, for example, the editor of Nature, which is one of the largest scientific journals in the world, uh, arguments detailing the existence of God, just like the similar to the argument that I gave uh, moments ago about how abiogenesis is impossible, and that the only mm, possibility is that there is a supreme creator, an Adi Purusha. Then, the editor would just look at it and say, this is unscientific, right? Just straight off, because it doesn't conform to what the ideas of the scientific mythology say, of what the scientific mythology is. And so it's kind of this, and it's what's sometimes called the great knowledge filter, in the sense that they keep out certain forms of evidence that do not conform with their own religious system. Because now, every time you bring up these things, people say, okay, you say these things, where are the peer-reviewed studies that back up what you're saying? But anytime, no matter how good the evidence is of trying to submit to peer-reviewed journals, they say, no, 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 this is just religion, this is just dogma. And so there are no peer-reviewed studies. And so the atheists can keep being in their little bubble of uh, trying to chase as much sense gratification as possible and attempting and failing to enjoy in that way. But Bhagavat's Dharma is different. Krishna says that actually he says in Bhagavad Gita that this process is the perfection of religion, the perfection of Dharma, because it gives understanding of the self by realization. Uh, and Prabhupada says here in the purport that a devotee following the principles of Bhagavad Dharma feel very much obliged to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He can understand the difference between life without Bhagavad Dharma and life with Bhagavad Dharma. So you can actually understand the difference between the two. And this is actually the scientific process, that one can perform the experiment of devotional service and uh, actually see the results for oneself. But one has to perform the experiment in order to see the results. This is how devotional service is kept confidential. It was just like taste, right? If I tell somebody that this water, so this bottle is filled with water, if I say that this water is pure and satisfying, the only way to see if that is true or not is to perform the experiment. It is to take a taste of the water. And if I say that devotional service is pure and satisfying, the only way to figure that out is to figure out whether that's true or not. Is to perform the experiments, is to take a taste of devotional service and see uh, what, and to see that it actually is pure and satisfying. And this is actually the scientific process, not what passes for science in this age, but actually reason and experiment trying to get to the truth. And if one is actually a scientist, then he will become a devotee of Krishna. So we should make sure that people actually know this, that what passes for science in this age is simply a cover for atheism, and that true scientific inquiry leads to bhakti yoga, to devotional service, to Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So I'll stop here. Any comments, questions, additions, subtractions? Anything for Boo?
Yes, thank you so much for wonderful scientific presentation of glorious Srimad Bhagavatam.
Oh, thank you.
It is so awesome to hear such philosophical presentation connected with scientific language.
Hmm.
So this was was presenting uh, made me a little bit nervous because it seems like atheists and uh, are like dominating force in this material world,
Yes.
and they do whatever they want just to present their view on what they want.
Hmm.
So it brought to my mind the story from Srimad Bhagavatam when Maharaj Yudhishthir he organized Rajasuya Yagya for the sake of not persuading the world, but establish the fact that Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead.
Yeah.
Everybody needs to surrender to, including demigods. They need to recognize that Krishna is the supreme Lord.
Yeah.
Everyone should worship. So, can we, as devotees of Krishna, follow Maharaj Yudhishthir and create something also powerful that it can diminish the predomination of the scientific, you know,
Yeah. So the question was, given just like in Bhagavatam, where Maharaj Yudhisthira made the Rajasuya Yagya to establish, to point out that Krishna is the supreme, most worshipable. Can we do kind of the same thing to combat the atheists uh, who are just kind of doing whatever they want and then saying that it's scientific? Yes, it's our duty actually to yeah, do these sorts of things, to preach in this way. It can be a little bit difficult. We should try to uh, organize various things. And I think my own view on these things is that it takes a multi-pronged approach. In my opinion, if it's just the scientists saying, the scientific devotees, just keep saying things, then it's a bit easier to ignore because the community of expert scientists is a bit small compared to the general populace. So, because maybe I'll talk about this more next time I give class, but there's the scientists, which is kind of one level, who are kind of saying all of these things. But then there's the science journalists, who are a whole different problem. People who write about science, which is actually how most of the population get their scientific news, let's say, or their scientific understanding, between that and the schools. Because, if I write a paper detailing all of these things and proving conclusively that Krishna is the origin of everything, and then put it on, the archive, so a preprint repository where just scientists look, then the scientists will see it, but, the science journalists will never write about it. So, this directly scientific preaching is important, but also what's needed is, in my opinion, uh, strong cultural push in every sphere, preaching in every single sphere. Because when the mm, original devotee scientists were uh, going around doing debates, giving talks, conferences, things like that, back when Prabhupada was here. From my understanding, from my perception of the situation, it wasn't so much that Sadaputa Prabhu and the others, it's like, oh, his scientific credentials are so great, so let's hear what he has to say. It's that the Hare Krishna movement was so powerful at the time, was so much in the culture at the time. That it's like, oh, this person's a Hare Krishna and has these credentials, so let me listen to him. So yeah, the scientific side needs to happen, but also uh, mass book distribution, mass Harinam, mass everything, mass internet preaching, mass this, mass that, uh, in order for people to actually take it seriously. Um, on the other hand, there is, I think, more avenue for these things to get out these days with the advent of the internet. Uh, so, because it's more easy, just by like making a YouTube channel or something to reach a lot of people who kind of bypass the scientific establishment and the scientific journal establishment. So there's different things that can be done. And, probably starting small at first and then growing, growing, growing. Uh, I think actually the one of the best things that could be done, or one way to get it out very widely, is if somehow or other a debate between a devotee and one of these big name atheists could be done. Because people will watch the debate simply because, it's Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris or something like that. Not so much because it's a devotee, because what they're saying, but, he will come watch it because it's them, and then we'll hear the actual science of Krishna consciousness. So there's a lot that could be done, just trying to apply our intelligence to get the message out. Who knows? Maybe I should start a YouTube channel where I talk about these things. All right. Are there any comments or questions from Panlila? Yeah.
So these instances of like accepting and not accepting what modern scientists have like brought up,
Yeah.
there seems to be some things that are like there is like rock solid evidence that this has happened.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, so um I feel like within kind of like devotee movement, there's a lot of like shame on scientists, like oh shit, scientists is just their whole theory is wrong, which is true because it's based on evolution. But it's like a very negative perception of it, where that there is actually some things that are true.
Mhm.
So how would you tell someone that also not completely discouraging it or like
Yeah, so it is sometimes. I think I kind of I alluded to during the class. For some theories, there are some reasons that, kind of prima facie or at first glance, that it seems like that's the uh, case, right? Like, for example, if you look and do certain measurements, it seems like the galaxies are moving away from each other, which seems like, well, if you go backwards in time, if they're moving away from each other now, and then they were all together at one point, and then it went out like an explosion, which is the original idea behind the Big Bang. So there are certain theories that seem to have evidence behind them. But generally speaking, the what should you say? The conclusion goes further than what the evidence actually says. Uh, and that it's so generally what the scientific establishment presents is that this is the only way to understand the evidence. While there's while we don't reject good evidence, we can also present different ways to understand um, the the evidence that is there. So here's an example. For example, like geological evidence, fossils and things like that. So one of the evidence that is brought up in terms of evolution is the different strata, right? So you find simpler fossils or fossils of simpler creatures further down. And then the more you go up, the more complicated that it is. And the evolutionist theory is that, well, the reason for this is because these more complicated forms didn't exist back then. But Jutta Karma Prabhu came up with this idea that's, well, actually, if you look at the statistics, right, like a statistical idea, more complicated forms are harder to fossilize, first of all. And the lower strata are less uh, explored. So we haven't dug up as many of as much of them yet. So they're less discovered things there. And actually, if you look at these different factors and look at it statistically, you get exactly what the evidence says, which implies that the other theory, the other hypothesis, is that there were humans or other complex forms there. It's just that the human form is harder to fossilize than, an amoeba or a troglodyte or something, right? So it's not that, evidence things like that evolution, for example, is the only thing that fits the evidence. So yeah, we don't necessarily reject good evidence. Uh, of course, the caveat there is you have to make sure that the evidence is actually good and actually is what they say that it is. Um, but we don't have to accept the scientist interpretation of the evidence. So does that answer a little?
I'm like 60% satisfied. That's a good. I like that we don't interpret, like we don't accept the scientist's interpretation of, because that's where it goes astray.
Yeah.
But the evidence isn't necessarily wrong. Like example, you have the different layers. Like my dad's a geologist, so like I get lectured on these like the sedimentary
Yeah.
layers, like times the layers of a tree. You can trace it back like thousands of years.
Mhm.
So these things, yeah.
All right. Is there anything, do you want to talk about the 40% that you're,
I'll have to think about some other questions before I can speak on them.
okay. James, I see your virtual hand.
Hi, Krishna Prabhu. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, very, very great class today. My question is, so here in Atlanta, I go to this sangha every week, where, you know, we do kirtan and read from Bhagavad Gita and kind of give a lesson that's relevant to like modern life.
Mhm.
And one thing I've noticed is that a lot of the people that have been coming recently, they have this kind of new age kind of ideology regarding uh, it's kind of steeped in a sort of mental speculation, like I am the knower and I receive all the information from the universe. And it's been
Mhm.
kind of like an ongoing thing the last couple of weeks. Um, my question is, how would you possibly go about, reaching more bhakti to this particular type of individual? Because I do want to say something that's pleasing and beneficial, but most of the time, when I hear certain things that are being said from certain individuals, and it's kind of rotating the people that are coming,
Mhm.
um, I, you know, a lot of the times the things that are being said aren't necessarily wrong, but they're not necessarily fully um like you can go deeper into it. But I my personality isn't kind of like to, you know, I don't feel it right to kind of like cut them down in a way. So
Mm.
my natural inclination is just to kind of, I'll agree, we'll just eat prashadam and continue. But maybe is there another angle of vision to kind of approach this kind of like new age mental speculation? I'm the knower. The universe is giving me downloads, this type of rhetoric. I don't know if you have a different angle to this.
Yeah, so the whole thing with New Age, like preaching against the New Age philosophy, it can be a bit difficult because one, there isn't necessarily so much philosophy in the New Age philosophy, uh, but um, yeah, it depends exactly what they're saying. So if their idea is that uh, they are just like receiving beams of knowledge from the universe, uh, I mean, you can, I guess, ask what that knowledge is, uh, and try to guide them towards the right understanding. Yeah, I mean, I guess it really depends. Like a lot of things with the New Age, it really depends on exactly what they're saying specifically, as in like, because it's a very
I
wide
can give an
range of
example.
things. Yeah, sure.
So there was one weekend, week where we were discussing, in the Bhagavad Gita regarding karma yoga,
Hmm.
and kind of like going over just, how we're not fully in control of, everything that's happening to us, because of karma and all of this.
Yeah.
And I remember one individual after the class, they were trying to be respectful,
Hmm.
regarding, uh, not trying to discount what was being spoken in the class, but, they would keep going on about, being a controller and, you know, uh, receiving information on moving in the right direction in life. And, you create your reality and this kind of things. In
Mm.
this instance, I didn't really combat it. Um, I kind of let him just say what he needed to say and just continued on. But, maybe there was a different way I could have went about it, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, this whole idea of somebody saying, "Oh, I just manifest my own reality," or things like that. You could ask them if they ever get sick,
Mm, mm,
right? So nobody manifests getting sick, but still sickness comes. Birth, death, disease, old age. Are they manifesting getting older and their body deteriorating? Is that what they're deciding to happen? Of course not. So, and I mean, a lot of times with the new age people, probably the best thing to do, in my opinion, is yeah, give them prashadam. Also, just get them to read Prabhupada's books. Uh, that's the, Prabhupada will clear out all of these different ideas better than anybody else can. So yeah, like you can say these different things for these different ideas, but I'd say as a whole, I mean, for every philosophy, but especially for the New Age crowd, just get them reading, Bhagavad Gita. So I think we are out of time. So thank you everybody for attending. Srimad Bhagavatam ki.